Put your hands behind your back.
On what charges, officer?
You're being detained for obstruction.
I want it on your body cam that I am Magistrate Judge Robert Franklin. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights.
An ordinary weekend at a community library became the catalyst for a massive $2 million lawsuit after a law enforcement officer's actions were documented on his department-issued camera. The recording captured a series of constitutional violations that would ultimately end a career and force systemic changes across an entire police force. The officer had no idea that the man he targeted wasn't an average citizen. He was Magistrate Judge Mason Frank, someone deeply versed in constitutional law. By the time the truth emerged, irreversible damage had been done. The incident began on an unremarkable Saturday. Mason Frank, age 62, had brought his 5-year-old granddaughter Emma to the East Side Public Library. The little girl, dressed in a cheerful pink coat, was absorbed in a colorful book about prehistoric creatures while her grandfather helped her with pronunciation. Mason had dedicated over 15 years to serving as a magistrate judge, preceded by 2 decades as an attorney specializing in civil liberties. His understanding of legal principles was exceptional. That afternoon, however, he wasn't in judicial attire, just casual clothing. Denim pants, a plain blue pullover, and athletic shoes. To any observer, he simply appeared to be what he was, a caring grandparent enjoying time with family. Officer Kelvin Martins happened to be driving past the library when he decided to enter the building. His official explanation would later claim he was conducting standard community outreach. However, his body camera footage would contradict this narrative. Martins had accumulated 12 formal grievances during his 8-year tenure, all related to discriminatory enforcement practices. Despite this record, he'd faced minimal disciplinary action and operated with a sense of impunity. As Martins entered the library with his body camera already activated per department protocol, he surveyed the children's area, his attention fixed on Mason sitting with Emma. His demeanor was immediately suspicious rather than friendly, his hand positioning near his service weapon. Mason noticed the approaching officer but maintained his focus on helping his granddaughter, keeping the officer in his peripheral awareness. When Martin stopped near their table, his opening words weren't a greeting but an interrogation. "What are you doing here?" the officer demanded. Mason looked up, maintaining a neutral and courteous expression, a skill he'd refined over decades of similar encounters. "I'm reading with my granddaughter," he replied evenly, gesturing toward Emma and their collection of books. Martin studied Emma, then returned his gaze to Mason, his eyes narrowing. "That's your granddaughter?" "Yes, she is." "Where are her parents?" Mason recognized where this was heading. He could have challenged the relevance of these questions, but he decided to document the interaction thoroughly. "Her mother, my daughter, is attending a professional conference. I'm providing childcare this weekend." Other library visitors had begun noticing the exchange. An elderly patron looked up from her reading material. A parent with children paused mid-stride. "Do you have any identification on you?" Martins asked. This request crossed into illegal territory. Mason understood that absent reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, officers cannot demand identification. Reading with a child in a library doesn't constitute criminal behavior. However, he also recognized that refusing might intensify the situation with his young granddaughter present. "Officer, am I being detained or am I free to go?" Mason inquired calmly. Martins's expression hardened. "I'm asking the questions here. I need to see your ID. I understand you're asking, but I'm trying to understand the legal basis for your request. Have I committed a crime?" "I'm conducting an investigation." "An investigation into what specific criminal activity?" The body camera recorded every word. Martins appeared frustrated. He wasn't accustomed to people who understood their constitutional protections, particularly not black men in public settings. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," Martins stated. Mason nodded thoughtfully. "What kind of suspicious activity? In a public library?" "That's not your concern. Your concern is cooperating with a police officer. I'm happy to cooperate within legal boundaries. But as a citizen, I have rights. I'm sitting in a public library with my granddaughter reading books. I haven't broken any laws." The librarian approached from the circulation desk, looking worried. "Is everything all right here? This is a quiet space for children." Martins barely acknowledged her. Police business, please step back. Mason appreciated the attempt to intervene, but he could see her discomfort in confronting an officer. She retreated but remained nearby, watching. Martins moved closer. You're being awfully defensive for someone with nothing to hide. Mason recognized this classic manipulation, the implication that exercising constitutional rights indicates guilt. This reasoning had resulted in countless wrongful detentions. I'm not being defensive, officer. I'm being informed about my rights. Emma had now sensed the tension. She stopped looking at her book and grabbed her grandfather's arm. Grandpa, why is he talking to us like that? Mason gently touched her head. It's okay, sweetheart. This is a police officer. Everything is fine. Martins looked at Emma, then back at Mason. Is there anyone who can verify that this is actually your granddaughter? Mason felt anger rising but kept his voice steady. You want me to prove this child is my granddaughter in a library? On what legal grounds? Like I said, we've had reports. Reports of what? Specifically, a black man sitting with a lighter-skinned child? Is that the suspicious activity you're investigating? Emma was biracial. Her mother, Mason's daughter, was black, her father white. Emma had lighter skin tone than Mason, and her hair texture differed from his. Mason understood exactly what Martins was implying, and he wanted it clearly stated on the body camera. Martins didn't answer directly. I need you to provide identification and contact information for the child's parents. And if I refuse based on my Fourth Amendment rights? Then we're going to have a problem. The elderly woman who'd been observing stood up. Officer, I've been here for an hour. This man has been reading with this little girl the whole time. They're not bothering anyone. This is a library. Martins turned to her, irritated. Ma'am, I need you to stay out of this. I'm just saying what I've observed. They've been perfectly peaceful. Ma'am, final warning. Step back. Mason looked at his granddaughter, who now appeared worried. He made a decision. He would provide identification but make clear this was under duress. I want it stated for your body cam that I'm providing identification under protest. I do not believe there is any legal basis for this request, but I'm complying to avoid escalation in front of my granddaughter and in this public library. He slowly reached into his pocket and withdrew his wallet, handing Martins his driver's license. Martins examined it and walked away to run the license through dispatch. The name Mason Frank meant nothing to him. Mason waited patiently. Emma climbed onto his lap and he embraced her, speaking softly about how sometimes officers make mistakes but everything would work out. The librarian remained nearby, now joined by a colleague. The elderly woman had produced her cell phone and appeared to be recording. Martins returned with the license. The license is valid, but I still need contact information for the parents. You have my information. I've told you I'm her grandfather. What specific crime are you investigating that requires parental contact information? I could charge you with obstruction. Mason nearly laughed. Obstruction required interfering with a lawful investigation. Nothing about this stop was lawful. Officer, I don't think you want to do that. Are you threatening me? Not at all. I'm informing you that you're making a mistake. Martins's face reddened. Stand up. Am I being arrested in a library in front of children for reading with my granddaughter? I said stand up. Mason gently moved Emma off his lap and stood, positioning himself between Martins and her. On what charges? Turn around and put your hands behind your back. This was the moment that would cost the city $2 million. Mason complied, turning around slowly. Emma started crying, reaching for her grandfather. Other children in the library stopped their activities, some staring, some looking frightened. Their parents quickly gathered them, moving away from the scene. Martins pulled out his handcuffs. At that moment, another officer arrived. Officer Lisa Chin had been dispatched after the librarian quietly called 911, requesting a supervisor because an officer was causing a disturbance in the children's section. Chin entered and immediately sensed something was wrong. Martins, what's going on? Subject refused to cooperate with investigation. I'm detaining him. Chin looked at Mason standing with his hands behind his back, then at the crying child, then at the horrified library patrons, then back at Martins. What investigation? This is a library. Possible child abduction. The elderly woman called out, That's ridiculous. I've been watching them read together for an hour. Mason spoke calmly, even with his hands behind his back. Officer Chin, is it? I'm Magistrate Judge Mason Frank. I'm here reading with my granddaughter. Your colleague has violated my Fourth Amendment rights, conducted an unlawful stop without reasonable suspicion, and is now arresting me without probable cause. All of this is being recorded on his body cam. Additionally, there are multiple civilian witnesses. Martins froze. Chen's eyes widened. What did you say? Chen asked. I'm a magistrate judge for this county. I've been illegally detained while babysitting my granddaughter in a public library. Martins's hands trembled. He still held the handcuffs but hadn't secured them. Chen quickly stepped forward and Martins released his position, stepping backward. His face had gone pale. Mason turned around and immediately went to Emma, kneeling down and holding her. Chen approached respectfully, her demeanor completely different from Martins's. Judge Frank, I apologize for this situation. Can we talk about what happened here? Mason's voice remained calm but firm as he comforted his granddaughter. Officer, everything that needs to be said is on that body cam. Your colleague racially profiled me, conducted an unlawful stop, demanded identification without reasonable suspicion, and attempted to arrest me without probable cause in a public library in front of my 5-year-old granddaughter and numerous witnesses, including children. Chen looked at Martins, who stood frozen. She knew the department was in serious trouble. Everyone in county law enforcement knew who Judge Frank was, respected, fair, but known for zero tolerance regarding civil rights violations. I understand, Your Honor. Don't call me Your Honor. I'm not on the bench right now. I'm a grandfather who was reading with his granddaughter. That's all I was doing. Chen nodded. Would you be willing to come to the station to file a formal complaint? No. I'll be contacting the department through my attorney. Right now, I'm taking my granddaughter home because she's upset and we're leaving these library books here since we didn't get to finish our reading time. The librarian quickly spoke up. Sir, please take the books. Consider the late fees waived for as long as you need them. I'm so sorry this happened here. Mason gave her a small appreciative nod. He gathered their belongings. Emma clung to him, her face buried in his shoulder. As he walked past Martins toward the exit, he stopped briefly. Officer, I hope you learned something from this. Martins said nothing. He stood among the children's books and colorful reading posters, knowing his career was likely over. The elderly woman approached Mason at the door. I recorded some of that on my phone. If you need a witness, here's my information. She handed him a slip of paper with her contact details. Thank you, ma'am. That's very kind. Mason drove Emma back to his house. She was quiet in the back seat, occasionally sniffling. He felt deep sadness, not for himself, but for what she'd witnessed. This wasn't how a child should learn about the world. That evening, after Emma had calmed down and was watching television, Mason made several phone calls. First to his daughter explaining what happened. She was furious. Then he called his attorney, a colleague he'd known for 30 years. The attorney listened to everything and asked Mason to send him the police report when available. Mason also filed a formal request for the body cam footage. As a judge, he knew exactly how to navigate the system. The following Monday, Mason went to court as usual. Word had spread through the legal community. Several colleagues approached him privately to express support. The police chief called requesting a meeting, which Mason declined, referring him to his attorney instead. The librarian had also filed an incident report documenting the disruption and distress caused to children who witnessed the interaction. The library director sent a formal complaint to the police department, noting that officers were welcome for legitimate purposes, but discriminatory enforcement in their facility was unacceptable. The body cam footage was reviewed by Internal Affairs. It was damning. Every exchange showed Martins had no legal basis for the stop. His questions were clearly motivated by seeing a black man with a lighter-skinned child. His escalation to arrest in a library full of witnesses and children was completely unjustified. Martins was placed on administrative leave within a week. The police chief issued a public apology, though Mason found it insufficient. An apology didn't change what happened or erase Emma's tears. Mason's attorney filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against both Officer Martins personally and the city. The lawsuit outlined each constitutional violation in detail. It also referenced Martins's history of complaints, arguing the department's failure to properly discipline him had enabled this incident. The lawsuit additionally noted the public nature of the violation in an educational space frequented by families. The city's attorneys knew they had no defense. The body cam footage eliminated any possibility of disputing the facts. Settlement negotiations began within 2 months. The city wanted to avoid trial, knowing a jury would likely award even more. They also wanted to prevent additional public attention on Martins's complaint history and the department's poor record on addressing bias. Mason's attorney pushed for a substantial settlement, not because Mason needed money, but because it needed to send a message. Cities only changed behavior when it hurt financially. The initial offer was $500,000. Mason rejected it. The city offered $1 million. Mason rejected that too. His attorney made clear this case would go to trial unless the settlement reflected the seriousness of the violation and included mandatory reforms. After 4 months of negotiation, they reached an agreement, $2 million with $1.5 million going to Mason and the remainder covering legal fees. But Mason negotiated for more than money. The settlement required the police department to implement reforms, enhance training on constitutional rights and racial bias, strengthen discipline systems for officers with multiple complaints, mandatory body cameras for all interactions with severe penalties for deactivation and Martins's termination. The city council had to approve the settlement in a public meeting. Several council members expressed frustration at the amount, though none criticized the officers' behavior as strongly as the price tag. Mason attended and spoke during public comment. He discussed what it meant to be a black man in America, where even credentials and education couldn't protect you from being seen as suspicious. He talked about his granddaughter witnessing her grandfather being handcuffed in a place that should be safe. He talked about thousands experiencing similar treatment without his knowledge or resources to fight back. His words were measured but powerful. Several council members looked uncomfortable. The gallery was packed with supporters, many people of color with their own stories of police mistreatment. The council voted to approve, 7 in favor, 2 against. Martins was officially fired 3 days later. He attempted to appeal through his union, but the body cam evidence made his case impossible. His law enforcement career was over. For Mason, the money was never the point. He donated a significant portion to organizations providing legal support for people who couldn't afford attorneys when their rights were violated. He established a scholarship fund for law students of color and set up a college fund for Emma. The mandated reforms began implementation. The police chief, who'd been in office for 12 years, announced his retirement 6 months later. Whether related to the settlement or simply timing was unclear, but many saw it as the old guard being pushed out. Officer Chin, who had intervened, was promoted to sergeant. She became involved in the training program, using the body cam footage as an example of what not to do. New recruits watched it during their first week. The case received national media attention. News outlets covered the story of the judge racially profiled while babysitting in a library. It sparked conversations about bias in policing, about who is presumed to belong in public spaces, and about what happens when people know their rights. Some commentators framed it as an isolated incident, one bad officer making one bad choice. But Mason pushed back in interviews. This wasn't isolated. It was systemic. Martins had 12 previous complaints the department ignored. That wasn't one bad apple. That was an orchard not being properly maintained. The body cam footage was released to the public after settlement finalization. It went viral. Millions watched it, seeing the calm dignity with which Mason handled the situation, the clear violation of his rights, the absurdity of the library setting, and the moment when Martins realized he'd made a career-ending mistake. Legal experts analyzed every exchange, pointing out exactly where Martins went wrong and how Mason's legal knowledge protected him. But comment sections revealed a divide. Many expressed outrage at Martins's behavior and support for Mason. Others insisted he should have shown ID immediately, that he was being difficult, that he escalated by asserting his rights. These comments revealed why incidents like this kept happening. A significant portion of the public believed certain people didn't have the same right to exist in public spaces without justification. Mason became an advocate for police reform. He gave speeches at law schools and civil rights conferences, not to gain sympathy but to educate. He wanted people to understand this wasn't about him being a judge, it was about him being a black man. If it could happen to a judge in a library, imagine how much worse for people without power or resources. Emma, now older, has limited memory of that day. Mason is grateful. She knows her grandfather is a judge who helps people. She knows officers are supposed to protect people but sometimes make mistakes. He tries to give her hope in the system while being honest about its flaws. The library where the incident occurred became a gathering place for community discussions on police reform. The library director organized public forums inviting community members and police representatives to dialogue about bias and accountability. The children's section became a symbol of violated innocence and the need for change. Mason still visits that library with Emma sometimes. She's older now, interested in chapter books. He still sits with her at those small tables. Sometimes people recognize him. Most are respectful, expressing support. The library staff always greet him warmly. A few patrons give him disapproving looks. He knows they're people who thought he should have complied without question. Martins's life took a different turn. Unable to work in law enforcement, he took a job in private security, then lost it after someone recognized him from the viral video. He filed for bankruptcy 2 years later. In one interview, he claimed he was the real victim, that his life was ruined over a simple misunderstanding. He never truly apologized or acknowledged wrongdoing. The department's reforms had mixed results. Training improved, and officers were more careful about documenting reasoning for stops. Complaint numbers initially decreased, though some activists argued this was because people had less faith in the complaint process, not because behavior improved. Real change was slower than anyone wanted. For Mason, life continued. He kept serving as magistrate judge with the same fairness. But he carried that day with him, not as trauma but as a reminder that the law only protects you if people in power choose to follow it, a reminder that justice must be fought for constantly, even when tired, even when just trying to read dinosaur books with your granddaughter. The $2 million settlement became a reference point in other cases. Attorneys representing victims of racial profiling would cite it in negotiations. Cities started taking these cases more seriously, knowing financial consequences could be severe. Insurance companies covering municipalities increased scrutiny of police departments with poor records. The incident became more than one man's experience. It became a teaching moment, a rallying point, and a warning. The body cam Martins wore to protect himself became the evidence that destroyed his career and cost his city $2 million. The judge he tried to intimidate remained calm, knew his rights, and ensured accountability. Not every story of racial profiling ends with justice. Most don't. Most people don't have Mason's knowledge or resources. Most incidents aren't captured on video. Most victims never see compensation or an apology. But this one did, and it mattered. It showed that even systems designed to protect power could be forced to acknowledge failures when someone knew how to work those systems from the inside. Mason Frank remains a magistrate judge. He's still a grandfather. And he's still a black man who refuses to accept that his presence in public spaces needs justification. That refusal, backed by knowledge and courage, changed one city's policies and gave hope to countless others facing similar injustices. The body cam footage remains online, a permanent record of what happens when prejudice meets someone who knows the law better than the officer trying to enforce it. The cost to the city wasn't just $2 million, it was reputation, trust, and the career of an officer who thought he was untouchable. And perhaps most importantly, it was a reminder that everyone is watching, that every interaction matters, and that justice, while often delayed, can still arrive.